Indigenous elder shares his story how star people that he calls moon people crashed on his reservation. Please watch the video before this one. He tells of ETs, star people, coming from a very cold planet and saying that these people still live in the North Pole, underground, living inside the earth, and they were here before the Great Flood. And they were also, they look like us, and that they're taller, fair-skinned, and with bigger eyes. Now, they look like us, that's what he said. But let's go into more detail about what he says concerning their appearance. Now, Dr. R.D. Sixkiller, Professor Emeritus at Montana State University, who is, as we said, Cherokee Choctaw, is researching the indigenous people's legends, and especially concerning extraterrestrials, their spaceship, the star people. She collects encounters between them and the Native Americans. She's been doing this for many years, and she's written books on them. So the implications to the public, they should be aware of this, because there are truths in legends. Now, we first learned about star people when he said, about star people when my grandmother told me the ancient legend of my people. My childhood reality include narratives that trace the origins of the indigenous people to Americas to Pleiades, stories of little people who intervened in people's lives, legends about the magical gift of the DNA of the star people that flowed in the veins of the indigenous tribes of the earth. I remember, she said, the stories of the celestial visitors who lived among the Indian people as part of my heritage. So this reminds us of the book of Genesis, chapter 6, of the sons of God and the daughters of men, and of course the interrelationships. Kindly support my Patreon account, since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. And let's remember that this was all pre-flood, so it could have been around the time of the Younger Dryas comet that changed the, a lot of people believe that that was the time of the Great Flood. Now, in her book, Clark says she has many stories. One of them comes from a man named Harrison. She says, located in the states of North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana, the Northern Plain Indian tribes have many accounts about UFOs. The story in this chapter is told by a well-respected elder of the Northern Plains tribe. His encounter predates the crash at Roswell. Since I recorded this story, Harrison has passed away, but the time I spent with them over the years changed my life, she said. Harrison told a story of how his grandfather took him on a spaceship in the summer of 1945 when he was 12. He explained how the Army Corps of Engineers came to the reservation around the summer of 47 to survey the river and surrounding areas for the reservoir. So originally there was no reservoir. The Corps confiscated the land and in return gave Harrison's grandfather a worthless piece of land on the other side of the butte. Harrison said, I spent every summer on this place from the time I was 6 years old. Mom and Pop both worked for the tribe, and they didn't want me home alone during the summer, so every May I packed 2 paper bags, one with a change of clothes and the other with books, marbles, and my toy gun. My folks dropped me off to live with Gramps from June to late August. I loved the summers there. Even in the isolation, I was the only child for miles. I rode horses and herded cattle, helped with the chores, whatever I could do. As I got older, there were bigger chores and more responsibility. There was no TV or videos like kids have today. At night, Gramps amused me with the ancient myths and legend of our people. Isn't that amazing? I mean, okay, that's what we had before television. The generations, the older generation was telling new generation stories about what was going on in the past. Now, Dr. Clark's relationship with Harrison grew over the years, and they met many times when his school district requested her assistance in applying for a federal grant, and Harrison was her contact and responsible for escorting her around the reservation. And she says it took nearly 25 years of visits before Harrison asked me if I believed in star people, and she said yes. And then he said, "Someone told me you collect stories about star people. I find that unusual." And she said, "I've been collecting stories for a few years. I grew up hearing the ancient stories of the star people from my grandmother. Wherever I go, if I'm among indigenous people, I ask them about their stories of UFOs and star people. Perhaps someday I'll write a book. I've heard some amazing accounts from American Indians." So then Harrison offered to take her to her grandfather's place where he was spending his summers, where he shared an incredible story that took place in his grandfather's ranch before the Army Corps of Engineers became involved. He told the story his grandfather told him about a spaceship that crashed on the property. And Harrison said, "I saw the ship. I went aboard it. It was long cylinder, about 30 feet wide, 60 feet long. I measured it by pacing it off. Most of it stuck inside a butte close to the water level. It was well camouflaged. You could not see the butte now. It was covered by water when the Corps of Engineers flooded the valley, creating the reservoir." And he said, "The crash shook the ground so hard that Gramps thought the house was going to collapse. You could still see a crack in the foundation of the log cabin that Gramps said occurred when the spaceship crashed. The horses were so frightened that it took a month to round them up, and even then, they were constantly trying to escape. At first, Gramps thought it was an earthquake, but when he cleared, he saw the craft. It hit with such force that only a small section stuck out of the butte. But Gramps not only had a keen eye, he knew this land like the back of his hand. The smallest disturbance caught his attention. For the longest time, he sat on the butte watching for any sign of life. He kept a vigil for days. Finally, after a week or so, he ventured to the place of the impact. His grandfather told him that the starman who crashed and survived there lived in their craft for about 5 months before another ship came to rescue them. At the time of the crash, the closest ranch to our place was 10 miles away, and as fate would have it, those neighbors had moved out of state days before the crash occurred. Gramps delighted in keeping the starman's presence a secret. Harrison explained the first time his grandfather approached them, he did that by taking them an offering of food. They told him they do not eat flesh. He described them as taller than humans, at least 7 to 8 feet tall, and very white. Harrison said he described them as being so white that you could almost see inside them. I'm not sure what he meant, but that except he said their skin was thin. They had long, slender fingers, much longer than humans. Their hair was white. When the sun shined on it, Gramps said it looked like a halo surrounding their heads. He said that sometimes they looked like the angels depicted in the paintings of his Bible, except they did not wear gowns. Their eyes, too, he said, they changed color depending on the light. Also, Harrison's grandfather described what they wore. He said he was particularly interested in their clothes. They wore a one-piece light green outfit. He told me there were times he saw them wading in the river, and when he approached them, their suits were dry. He told me he wished he had a suit like that. When I think of the old man and how he viewed the star visitors, he did his best to describe what he saw. I'm sure if the same thing occurred today, the observers might offer a more sophisticated perspective. He went on to explain how his grandfather was not sure if all survived this crash. Harrison said that when he arrived in the summer after the visitors left, he went on board the craft and there were 17 seats. Harrison said, so in other words, another craft came to rescue the extraterrestrials, but the craft was left behind because it was not operable. Harrison said, Gramps said that he often saw the star people picking up rocks and plants. At first, when they saw him, they vanished before his eyes. He never discovered an explanation for that, but he wished that he had that power. Harrison laughed. Gramps thought that was the ultimate trait, simply to vanish in thin air when you wanted. I can't imagine how he planned to use it. As time passed, Gramps said the starman realized he meant no harm, and they didn't disappear when he approached. Over time, it became clear to him that they were concerned about their craft. They did not want it discovered. Gramps told him that the beings still lived there from late November until April, and according to him, another spaceship appeared April 17, 1945, and he never saw them again. He knew they were waiting for a rescue craft, so he expected it. He told me their spaceship was one of 4 exploring our Earth. They had been dropped off by a bigger ship that was circling the Earth. The big ship would return for them, but not for some time. They just had to wait. They were not afraid they would be discovered. They could make themselves invisible, but they could not do the same with their spaceship. He watched as they prepared to leave. Each of the stranded star travelers came to him and bowed before they left. He understood they appreciated his discretion. Gramps said they were voyagers and traveled the universe observing life on other worlds. They had been coming to Earth for thousands of years, observing, collecting, and noting changes. One day they took him aboard the craft and showed him pictures from their home. As he described it, I suspect it was some kind of a TV or computer, but in my grandfather's day there was no such thing, so he was enthralled by watching what he called a picture machine. He talked about flashing pictures that showed a place different from Earth. It reminded him of the Badlands, but with no vegetation. Their houses were underground. He asked them if it was heaven, and they told him they did not have a place such as heaven. He was fascinated by the picture machine and went back several times to view the pictures. Apparently, the star visitors told him they liked the green of Earth, and they thought the red willow that grew along the banks of the river was quite beautiful in April. They loved the water. On other world, water was underground, nothing on the surface. My grandfather frequently collected geodes for them. They were amazed when they broke open to reveal the crystallized cities inside. They were apparently pleased to add them to their collection, and Gramps also taught them the medicinal uses of the red willow and how to propagate it from a small sample. Now, as far as their crashed UFO, it was just left there. It was well camouflaged to the point nobody really would be able to recognize it with the naked eye unless they knew specifically where to look and what to look for. When he went inside the craft, Harrison, that is, explained that when you sat in the chair, it melted around him as if it was alive. It enveloped the body like a warm hug and then released you when you wanted to get up. The craft also had what looked like hieroglyphs. Eventually, the Army Corps of Engineers came and built their dam, which flooded the area where the craft was, and he suspects they took the craft as well. So it seems that there are a lot of legends and even evidence in the stories that Harrison told Clark concerning these extraterrestrial and their UFOs. Richard Wagamis is known as one of Canada's foremost authors and storytellers from Wabaseemoong First Nation, Northwest Ontario, one of the few Indigenous scholars left that have taken an active effort in retracing the roots, preserving heritage stories passed down from generation to generation throughout oral traditions. So this is just one more experience from this young man who saw the actual extraterrestrials and their crashed craft. So please leave your comments and thank you for your support. This is on Collective Evolution.